Welcome. My name is Michael Lower, and I'm Associate Professor of Practice in Law at Chinese University of Hong Kong. I'm with Dr. Emma Roberts from the Chester Law School in the UK, and my colleague Steven Gallagher, Associate Dean for Teaching and Learning in the Faculty of Law at CUHK. And today we're going to talk about Steve's innovative new course on superheroes and the law. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you both for inviting me along to co-host this podcast with you. I'm very excited to hear more about your module, Steve, on the superheroes and the law. I have a real interest in this principle of transitioning into university and so on. Tell me more about the premise of this module.
Right, thank you very much, Emma and Michael, for giving me a chance to talk about this. The course grew out of courses that I've taught before for high school students in our Summer Institute program and also in our Gifted Student program at CUHK. And in the past, I've run courses which are intended to give high school students a taste of studying law. So I try and pick some interesting topics. And one of them was on future law, which was to do with law and technology, the ethical and legal issues with the development of technology and the law keeping up with technology as well. And as usual, the best ideas always come from the students. And in particular, 2 years ago, on one of these courses I taught, my teaching assistant at the time, Raymond Ho, he at one point where we were dealing with some technical issues and technological advances, he just said, what we should do is show them a clip from some of the superhero films, from the Avengers or something like this. And, all these things are going on there. So the more we started to do this, the more I thought, well, we could really introduce students to a lot of legal principles using a familiar ideas, things that they're already familiar with, which would be the superhero films. So the premise is this, to try and give students an introduction to how law works and how law is taught. That's the main point.
That's really, really fascinating because, of course, what we try to do is reach out to the students in a medium that they're familiar with. And I think the superheroes concept is really fascinating. I try in my modules to kind of make it bring to light, especially with new first year students, just how far the law affects all aspects of our lives. So that there's that dimension of going into the virtual or fictional world in so doing it in this module of yours. So tell me how this kind of runs, what are the logistics?
Well, we ran it for the first time last summer, and the Summer Institute that we have at CUHK is again for secondary school students who are thinking of moving on into university, thinking about what to possibly study. So of course, when we deliver these courses, we are trying to encourage people to think of studying law. But we're aware of the fact that they may just be coming along just because there's an interest in this as well. So it runs over 2 weeks. And the idea was to, as I said, give them an introduction. One of the things I wanted to address was something that I've long had a problem with how we teach law, which is this idea of how we teach law in sort of little compartmentalized units. So first year, traditionally you would look at contract, at criminal law, maybe some public law or whatever else as separate things. And of course, we've been talking to a number of people who are trying to teach law in different ways, using things like problem-based learning, trying to teach law as a whole and saying, that they shouldn't be as separate subjects, where we should be looking at problems that lawyers have to face, problems that people have to face that involve law are more complex than that. And these things that we teach as separate subjects all interrelate. So again, I thought this was a really good way of trying to introduce those who are thinking of studying law to the idea that law fits together, and you have to sort of, when you go on into university and you're learning your contract and your criminal law, well, actually there are relations between the two. The public and private stuff does overlap. So again, that became part of designing the course. But I was also very conscious of the fact that I wanted to try and get students involved in designing the course. And also now, because it's moving on, to designing the materials as well, because I was aware of the fact that if I tried to write some materials to support them understanding how criminal law worked or contract, well, it's a long time since I've taught those things anyway, but actually it was much better to say, get recently graduated students to say, how would you like to have been taught these things? What would you like to have been told about these particular subjects and how they relate while you were studying? So I've been helped by some recent graduates who've actually designed some of the materials as well.
Well,
which I think is,
I have a lot of questions surrounding that. So that's a fantastic example of using students as partners. And I think the module in its remit lends itself really well to that. So the students know better than anybody, only being a couple of years ahead, really, what would actually appeal to those new students. I'm really interested in this idea of starting this module as a transitional module over the summer, with a view to looking to engage them with an interest in university study of law. What background would they have had? Would they have had any understanding of the law in an educational context beforehand? And how have you designed the module to ensure that you get that investment, that they do come on board?
Most of them would not have had it. In Hong Kong, we don't usually have, I think, at secondary schools as much of, in England, you would have A-level law or something along those lines. That doesn't seem to go on too much in Hong Kong. But of course, they have certain other general studies where they would have touched on legal issues as well. And of course, it's always surprising how much young people have picked up lots to do with the law. For many different reasons, some of them specific to Hong Kong in recent years. So they are interested anyway in some of the points that we're going to come to in the course. They have some understanding.
That's really interesting, especially, and I think we said beforehand, before we got started on this idea of developing the podcast, what an interesting thing is to compare these jurisdictions, not legal jurisdictions, but educational jurisdictions in that way. And the A-level in law is a very popular entry qualification for our students in the UK. So it's interesting to see that they don't have that in Hong Kong in general, because in my module of this kind of same transition concept, what I try to do is I try to level the playing field between those who do have that background in A-level in law and those who don't, because we do have a real mix of students coming in. And I agree, our students across the globe are no doubt becoming more politically aware, if not legally aware, than ever before. This idea of you saying studying, and I quite agree with your philosophy here, is, teaching law in silos is not really representative of how the law works in reality. So that synoptic element to your teaching, how do you think that helps the students understand the law in a real world context?
Well, from a practical point of view about future lawyers, the idea of knowing that their clients will come in with problems where they won't be coming in saying, I've got an issue in contract, I've got an issue in trusts or whatever. They'll come in with a general issue and expect them to be able to identify the areas and the overlaps between them. When it comes to studying, I think it helps because, again, I think one of the best things about learning law is, of course, once you start to see the links between the different things that you are studying. I was talking to a lawyer earlier this morning about something else to do with studying law, and she was explaining to me how she always thought that when you came towards the end of your law degree, it was almost as if something lifted off your eyes and you realized that everything came together. And to me, I thought that's a terrible thing, really. That should be at the beginning, that you realize that everything works together. And we're now going to learn about these things. But when we move on into year 2, we'll be learning about subjects that, again, bring these things together. And in year 3, hopefully we'll have some sort of overarching understanding and joining together of all of these subjects. I mean, that's the idea of one thing I did think of for the future is maybe using a similar idea for a capstone course as well, to sort of to test that there was an understanding of how the law fitted together towards the end of their legal studies.
Yeah, I like that idea of I suppose asking the students to map their understanding in this more broad and complicated web that is the legal system in practice. And I think in terms of a capstone, it would be really useful in terms of employability for our students as well, I think, because it would help them articulate their understanding of the law away from these silos in which they may have been learning the kind of threshold concepts in those areas. So in terms of this module then, and it being the precursor perhaps for a majority, would you say, do most students that take this module continue to university study?
The majority, I think, do, because they're usually, the way that the Summer Institute works is it usually takes those students who have already got higher grades or whatever else. And of course, Chinese University is really trying to identify and encourage them to come and join us as well. Yeah, most of them go on, I think, into university. I'm not sure how many actually go on into law at present. I mean, we only ran it the first time, but that will be interesting to see how many sort of progress on and maybe even come to us to study law as well.
I think that's really fascinating, and that's something really to draw down on the data and gain a better understanding, isn't it, of how many do kind of get that buy-in. But I believe you seek to get that investment from them by giving them an assessment and therefore giving them credit. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. The whole program introduced, I think, 2 years ago, a credit system. So they can take 2 courses on the Summer Institute. And if the faculty is approved, and my course was approved by the Faculty of Law, they can get a single credit for each of these courses, which counts towards their overall university credits if they join CUHK. So the students last year, I think the majority took all the assessments, and the majority, I used multiple choice tests really on a regular basis through the course to form an assessment where I wanted to, again, try to engage them as much as possible, keep them engaged and everything. And they got the credits. So again, hopefully that will encourage them to think about coming to us in the future as well. The good thing about using this familiar medium, as you said, was that whole idea again of engagement. You know, I usually teach equity and trusts, and teaching Hong Kong students about 400-year-old English cases. You know, it's great. I love these old cases as well, but there is a little bit of it where you think we need to use sometimes more up-to-date examples of things. And again, as you said, having a familiar medium, something that most of them have seen films or know something about these films as well, to be able to relate that to some of the things that we're now teaching them, I think it makes it, as you said, it makes it more real for them. Even though, of course, it is fiction, but it does make it more real for them.
That's really fascinating, and a lot of your underpinning design factors that you've taken into account have really, they resonate with me in designing the module that I've spoken to you both about in the past, and that intense kind of introduction to law, which is what I do on our degree program. And I think it really does pay dividend to the students who do engage, because they form such a sound foundation of the legal system in order to then understand these more substantive areas in context. Obviously, with that resonance from 2 very different education systems, it does bring to mind that maybe this is more of there's a global need for this. And what we've seen certainly in this imposed transition to digital learning is that last summer, I know that a lot of my students were making use of courses online, for example, and gaining badges on their social media, having done some training or another. And I think they've got that thirst for getting that reward and recognition for what they do. I guess what I'm talking about here is more broadly the kind of MOOCs that are available, as an open market, albeit they are produced by universities and have all these design principles behind them that we're discussing here. I wonder what your views are on the need for such a MOOC, for because we're talking very much about the same ideas as I've spoken about on your platform before, in terms of designing a connected experience across remote areas, but also connecting the students to the curriculum and how they can build on that into their degree programs.
I think that's it's really important, and I think for the future it is something I'd like to develop, and I would hope that maybe there are people to collaborate with in doing this, in building some MOOC. As you say, there are certain elements that are common to everyone here in these that we could use, and I think we could exploit in ways that would attract the students, would give them opportunities, as you say, to complete a course where they get some recognition for it as well. I think it also a MOOC would suit this sort of a course as an introduction for anyone who is interested in the law and how the law works as well. And I think there's probably a need for that. There aren't that many of these massive open online courses which provide a general understanding of the law or an introduction to understanding the law. And I think, again, we should be, between us all in the legal education community, thinking about how we should be able to extend this outside of just the universities, but allowing anyone, anywhere, to have access to materials and the opportunity to understand how the law works.
I completely agree, and you've given me a lot of food for thought. Perhaps we can take up the conversation with other legal education colleagues across the globe and see that come to fruition in the coming years. Thank you ever so much for answering my questions, Steve. As I say, you've given me a lot of food for thought as I turn my mind now to redesigning my module for the coming year. Thank you for your time, and thank you again both for inviting me today.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Emma.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.